I refrain from using the word empathy because it's been beaten to death thanks to design thinking being the only frame of design that the large scale world, the corporate world has understood, right? Beautiful posters. We can definitely design much better posters than what a Canva or any of these things can do because it's such a niche thing to be able to have an eye for a balance and typography and all of that. That's what we are taught, to make things beautiful, right? But is making things beautiful alone enough? In a country where we think that qualitative data is a lot of sham and emotion, Anthropic is a firm that has removed the human from the conversation, has put listening and human beings back and said that that's a scientist's job, right? Look at the shift. You expand design from the artifact space into the process space, then the application of design as a domain, as a career, as a potential space for engagement just increases multifold. And I think it gives you so many more entry points to do interesting work.
Yeah. Brown bacon.
How's it going, Aparna? Welcome to the Ground Bacon.
Thank you, Deepak, for having me. I've been watching your podcast for a while, so happy to be here and happy to converse with you. Yeah, all going.
Aparna, if you can introduce yourself to our guest, to our audience.
Yeah. So I'm Aparna Vinod. I basically go about calling myself a very accidental designer. Uh, Maybe as we speak, we'll figure out why it was an accident. But I work in the space of transformation, strategy, design and learning, and people experience. And those are my current passions. Uh, Beyond that, I also currently am pursuing my PhD in a space of community emergence. So a lot of my time and interests and spaces of exploration are in these varied interest areas, starting from how do you do strategy in large spaces, how do you design learning, how do you rethink culture, and some part of my PhD. And note some part because that's really taking the back seat at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about what you're diving into in detail, and what's your objective with with your pursuit of studying right now and doing your PhD. Also, talk about accessibility of users. That I think that's where our conversation started. As to this is something that we could talk about.
Yeah. So the pursuit of the PhD, I think, is mostly a vanity at this point. But no, jokes apart, I've been meaning to see. I've been an academic for some part of my life, and when I had to do a PhD at that point, something put me away from doing it because it became a need for organizational, moving up the ladder as a certain kind of prof, right? But for me, I think I got very lucky in the area of study that I was meaning to go into. And I wanted to find a very interdisciplinary space of learning where I could pretty much like design, where I think everything comes together to create a very new narrative. So the space I identified for my PhD was to understand what is the changing nature of leadership as the world is moving around us. And that also came from my current workplace, where I was working with a lot of blue collar workers, and we were consistently trying to understand what is the nature of leadership or agency. So, from that lens, I got interested in the idea of what could leadership be and how has leadership changed in time and space. So I've situated my PhD in a space called Kola Goldfields, where I'm from, and considering I'm from the design background, and I chose to do a practice-based PhD, which is a little different from the way the humanities conduct their study. I'm looking at things like ethnography, place-based learning, capturing people stories. How do you take these stories back to the community? And essentially, my work is situated in the community space and understanding people aspirations and things like that. And design becomes the way through which I'm bringing it all together. So that's my space of PhD and my doctoral work, and that's where I'm at currently. Yeah. Thank you for asking me this. I think it's every time I talk about it to other people, I sound very sure. But when I start writing it, I kind of forget what I'm doing. So thank you for bringing
Yeah.
that up. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens all the time, right? With me, I mean, it's always difficult to articulate, when you are in a space like you are. So, Aparna, what I could understand is that most. So I think this is from what I've understood that your user could be. So I think most advice or design advice assumes like an English speaking audience, right? Who are phone fluent, low stakes user, but actually your users are none of those things, right? So I want to pull that out of the story, and we're gonna have a conversation around that. Walk me through one specific day, right? Something you designed for an office worker, maybe just didn't work for someone on the line, right? If you can give us a scenario like that.
Yeah. So I like to go to the first question you asked, right? Like for me, in my current space of work where I do organizational design, one of the first learnings I had to have, and one of the first unlearnings I had to have as a designer, is the assumption that we come with that we are designing for people like us, right? So when you do UX or UI or product, or the assumption is that it's a white collar, it's a English speaking audience that you're designing for, and at most points it is a product that you're designing which is tangible, aesthetic, usable, accessible, and questions around access or questions around what is the person's ability to interact with that is not mostly asked, right? The assumption is that the application will take us through. So, in my current space of work, in the spaces of organizational design or culture, the real unlearning I had to do was really questioning, uh, you know, if I'm designing for people who are unlike me, and if I'm designing for people with the assumption that they should be like me, then it's not design, it's a preference that I'm putting out there. And just by putting a preference out there, I kind of take away a lot of their ability or their reality, their real needs, right? So many times in the workspace, we couldn't use the phone, we couldn't use posters, we couldn't use ways of engagement which would have otherwise been very accessible, maybe in a service industry kind of space where everybody has access to the internet, or has equitable access, or has equitable language understanding. So it was such a complex, it's quite a complex space to design for, and that's when design really moves away from the idea of an artifact to maybe designing or relooking roles or methods, or the way you land a message. Okay, so that unlearning, I think I took a lot of time, not a lot of time, I struggled with it, to say, because that's really not what we are taught at design school or even as a design faculty. I think I mean, equitable design, uh, and access, and we always say design for the user, but what if your user set is so diametrically different, and also demographically different, and also geographically very very different, and at the scale at which you're doing things. I think it was a really exciting design space to be in, because it broke design out of the idea of aesthetic and really brought it down to its bare bones of what I believed design should be, which is process. And that's where I'd like to uh, position myself also today when I talk about myself as a professional. Is For me, I mean, I think all designers have their own mantra of design, right? We all have our own, and that's why it's such a all-encompassing space, and it makes space for so many different kinds of people. But for me, what has happened in my past 2.5 years of doing the sort of work I do, and also prior to that, when I was in a learning space in a university where we are bound by certain forms and norms and restrictions and constraints, is to really come up with a kind of an explanation of design which which takes it out of its aesthetic focus all the time. So I kind of see design now as a Venn diagram with three pieces meeting together. And one part is maybe the need, and the need can change with context, time, space, where you locate yourself, and what are the kind of challenges the designer is putting themselves in. So I'm not bound by just organizational design. I'm also a learning designer. I'm also a designer for strategy and transformation. I'm also a designer who can design space and place and experience. So it allows me to kind of fit in the context into one of those circles. The other part would be the strategy itself. So based on your context, how do you how do you really access the need in a manner that whoever is the user of that need space can be delivered an experience that really changes their experience of the product or the whatever else that you're putting out there, right? How are you handling that need, and how are you accessing that problem, and how are you processing that space? And the third part essentially becomes the aesthetic, because the aesthetic then is, what does it look like, what does it feel like, how does it touch a person, how does it move a person, what are the stories you tell. So the aesthetic, once you do the need and the strategy, I think the aesthetic space really opens out so much more, because then you're not caught by the modality of maybe just a UX app or a poster, it could even be something like a retelling, it could even be like a little huddle, it could be like people getting together and telling stories to each other every day, it could be the way the classroom is designed and the way it is, the seating is imagined, right? Simple changes then become the design. And taking that lens, Deepak, has really, I think, given me a lot of freedom. Also granted me a lot of peace of not having to find the design battle, because I think a lot of times design gets caught in the aesthetic conversation, and it becomes very hard to explain what designers actually do. So yeah, that's
Yeah, and I think a bunch of it is also people are, I mean, all of these things that we are talking about today, it's supposed to be a part of a design module, but not probably, as has been so, because maybe a lot of social, people, like folks who are doing working around social impact, engineers, philanthropic background. So this is not something that maybe people are openly talking about, like, hey, a designer can solve a problem around it, or they can make the whole experience better. And what I love about this discussion and what you bring to the table and what we are talking about is, India is a very different country. Like India, as we say, like in every 50, 100 miles, there are different languages, different food. But while we are sort of going into a space where everyone understands English, maybe, though everyone doesn't understand, because there's so many, we are in a bubble, and like a very small amount of people are actually using and reading. There are so many people who are probably are probably alone in this space, and how we can make it more accessible for everyone who's a part. So I think it's more relevant to our
yeah.
country. I think that's number one. So Aparna, I'm also curious to know about how are we bringing empathy to all of this, like how what's something a frontline worker maybe are teaching us that no design textbook can talk about, or for example, if we are making an onboarding screen, right, for a 25-year-old in a startup office, right? So now if we make it work on a factory floor, right, different language, right, what's the first thing that breaks? So I'm just want to pick your brain on that. Just curious to know how you are thinking.
So firstly, I think I I refrain from using the word empathy. Okay, because it's been beaten to death thanks to design thinking being the only frame of design that the large scale world, the corporate world, has understood, right? And Deepak, you've been to design school, I've been to design school. We've never been taught design thinking as a paper ever. Have you been taught a design thinking paper? No, right?
No.
Right?
I think it took
So,
me, I spent like 5 years in a design school, and I never could have even understood it as a subject because it's so vast, deep, and have so much
so
context.
I'm glad we agree on that, right? So we've never been taught design thinking as a paper. We've been taught design. How were we integrated into the design world? I've been both a student of design and a faculty of design. So in both these spaces, the way I've been integrated into the world of design is by really putting somebody through a complex problem and asking them to solve the problem. And the first instinct that design enables you to do is to understand your user, not as another person, but as somebody you want to solve for. And this is a human instinct. This is an instinct that is all around us, right? The empathy instinct is in us. In when you see a person, who's had an accident on the road, you do stop and help that person. When you see, so the first human instinct is to gather the other when they are when they are in a space of conflict. Okay, it's different that we forget that at times and whatever. But I'm saying that the latent instinct in us is to be empathetic. So I don't even call out a process of designing for somebody unlike me as an empathetic process, because I think the minute I do that, there are so many other questions around ideas like, can I ever come from the same standing that they are in? Or the same spaces or memories or experiences that they come with. Could be in the spaces of, access, could be in the spaces of privilege, could be in the spaces of what are their histories, what do they come from, right? So many other. So can I empathize, or am I empathizing only for this problem? Because I don't see design as something that is solving only for a problem that is a screen at that point, right? Because it's a larger behavioral shift. It is also larger. The kind of work I do, it's about bringing people into, be it classroom, be it organization. It's about bringing people to buy into the larger idea of what we think is a vision, or what we think is a process, what we think is how learning should happen. It is in those spaces that I have worked. Yeah. So for me, when I refrain from using the word empathy, it doesn't mean that I go with the lens of I don't want to understand you. I do it without calling that out, to understand the person at the bare bones of what are they, who are they, what are the aspirations they have. So I spend a lot of time listening. And that, I think, is something I enjoy doing at work. And I think most organizations or large scale spaces struggle with that space quite a bit, because how much do you listen to? And you can listen, but what are you inferring from that listening, right? Because listening can happen in ways of just speaking. It can happen as somebody just saying something to you, but what do you take back as a designer who comes with an understanding of the deeper, if you're looking at this like an iceberg, what are the unsaid things? And it is in these unsaid things that you can plug in the personas of people. You can bring in, groups which are behaving in a certain context, in a certain manner, people from certain demographic areas conducting themselves in a certain manner, people from certain gender coming with certain aspirations. So these are groupings you can do if you start to do deep listening, right? So that for me is my act of empathy. And that's the shift I have made in my practice, very, 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 very consciously. And that also flows into everything I bring into a workspace. So the amount of time I take in, and I keep telling young people I work with this as well, that you can interview and you can listen. They're very different things for me. Yeah. So when I interview, I'm already going with an agenda of a set of questions that I want answered from my frame. So when you ask me what is the kind of screen that I want, I could ask a question: do you want a yellow screen? Do you want a blue screen? Do you want an image? Do you want it to move? Do you want it to? How do you want to engage with it? I could have very, very direct questions. Or I could have questions which could be, hey, what are the apps you use? What do you like about them? Where do you spend majority of your time? How does your time get used? Which app bores you out the most? Why does that happen to you? What are the kind of apps your friends are using? What do you like about this interface? How do you? What are the kind of languages you access it in? the tonality of that question itself, from a very survey method to asking questions which make people included in that conversation, can give you insight into how a screen can be designed, right? And we don't
Yeah.
go with this knowing that I know better for you what a screen should look like, because again, like we established right at the start, uh, I am not going from the lens of the fact that Aparna likes a certain kind of screen. Let's just take the example, Deepak, of TikTok. Okay, it was a viral application, right? And we know the kind of people who were using it, who were thriving on it, and how the aesthetic of TikTok was so different of an aesthetic of an Instagram, right? And who had a problem with TikTok, and who got cut away from TikTok. I'll give you a simple example. I have a very important person in my life who was a TikTok, content maker. Okay, and she is my beautician. Yeah, and she comes from Gorakhpur. Okay, and she loves to dance, and she used to make TikTok videos and post them on and she used to make money out of it. Okay, she used to make like a 4K for somebody from a social and economic strata like that. 4K is a lot of money doing things that you love doing. Okay, so it's about creating content that enables you, right? So but the aesthetic of that content was not something that maybe you and I will maybe not understand it, but that interface worked for them. And she was showing me how other people in her workspace, so they would record TikTok videos when they're in the parlor, or when she's traveling to her home in Gorakhpur, in front of a field. Okay, and she would be really dressed up and recording, and she was having so much fun doing it. So my point I'm trying to make is, uh, the idea of TikTok was, and it was not like only certain kind of users were using TikTok. There were also very different strata that was using TikTok. So TikTok gave people an opportunity to engage with it in a manner that brought their identities out, right? We see that happening with Instagram too a little bit now, in the way it is designed. But largely designers going with this sense that I know what I should design for you. That has changed for me in the current work that I have been doing to, hey, what are the languages you use? Do you use Tanglish, English? These people use Tamil and type in English. We all do that. I type in Malayalam in English.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I mean,
so
it's actually a funny thing that
yeah,
we also have different language where we think in. So, for
yes,
example, you could be a Tamil person, but must be thinking in English. Like
yes,
I've born and brought up with in the north, right, where Hindi is the primary language. But I think after my education or like traveling around or working in certain sector, I at this point may be thinking in English a lot of things, right?
yes, yes. So the access that the interface has to give you is to understand your user from and understanding your user is an act of empathy. But do we need to call it an act of empathy? Because that's really what you're supposed to do. If you're a designer, then you're solving for you're designing a process, right? Design is an act of putting a process to reconcile a problem. So obviously there's a problem which needs to be solved. You're trying to reconcile that, developing a process of a certain nature, and part of that process is to understand the person who's going to use it. So not everybody needs an application, not everybody needs a service screen, not everybody has access to this. So then how do you understand your user? And I think the minute you break out of that screen mode sorry, not just a screen mode, also from a mode of let me put out something there that you think is useful for you, and then you have to canvas and push people to use it, right, and convince them to use it is actually more painful. So I think moving out of that frame has been very liberating for me as a designer as well. It's really expanded my ability to think of design as something that can situate itself in spaces beyond the white collar space, beyond the UX UI interface space, into more people spaces uh, where design can influence policy, where design can influence people experiences, design can influence the way you reimagine a role. Like, let me give you an example. When I was teaching at a university, one of the things that I decided to do for a course that I was teaching was that I redefined my role as a prof in that course, as I am not going to teach. I'm just a co-facilitator, and I know again that is used as a very, everybody says you're a co-facilitator, but what does it mean? So I had to give myself a set of roles that I will perform, right? I changed the entire seating of the classroom. Nobody in the class was looking at me. Everybody was looking at each other. They were working in smaller groups. Just that seating arrangement made the class lean into each other and solve problems. We solved problems together. I was only a person who they would come to maybe guide them to think a little differently, perhaps. But just that role change is actually an act of design, Deepak. Yeah. The role change is an act of design, the space change is an act of design. Similarly, imagine if you redesign a performance appraisal process, right, as a designer, and you say that as a manager, my job is not to evaluate you, but my job is to witness your growth. Okay, then you're giving the manager a role he has to play, which makes him accountable to behave and conduct himself in a certain manner. You're also doing that to a teacher, right, in a classroom, by saying that when you're a facilitator, you're not evaluating, you're co-joining the journey, right? So then the whole space becomes something that you can rethink, and that's when design becomes a process. Otherwise, what would happen is, you would make another artifact, right, and say, okay, let's the performance review form is what the problem is, so let's redesign the questions in the performance review form. But why not design make its inroads into spaces where we think beyond artifact, where we think about where real people are real people problems are. And when designers begin to think like that, I think the applications that we can be in societal use is also going to increase. We are not just going to think about design as creating better product, and that's been something that I've been really trying to do with my career for some time now. Stay out of the product space as a product space, be in a more live environment, be it teaching, learning, organization. That's been my journey. Yeah.
Yeah, love it, love all the insights, Apana. I think what we are talking about here is also, redefining roles and not just artifacts, right? For
Yes.
example, design could be or used to mean, design this app, this
Correct.
poster, right? But your point is that the real job now is redesigning how people work and what their role even is, right? And the artifact is the smallest part of it, right?
Exactly.
And what, so I think what I could understand that your title could be basically three jobs in one, right?
Yes.
One is
More than three.
someone working around the culture, organization change, and also UX or experience design, right? Right. So why does that exist as one role instead of three people, like moving forward? What are your thoughts on that? Since we are in a space where there's so much happening,
Yeah.
and especially to a person who has maybe a lot of experience and are maybe sitting among leaders.
So let me have I understood your question right? You're asking me, why do you need three different roles when one person could do all these three? Okay, I essentially think one person should be able to do all these three like I'm doing. Okay, but I'll tell you why. The way design has been taught in or the kind of disservice we have done to design as a domain has been that one big disservice is design thinking. I have my grouse with it, which I don't, and because it was also beaten into a linear way of thinking to solve. Right? We never solve linearly, Deepak. We always solve in multifarious ways. Right? We are never in design. We are not solving one problem then going to the other problem. Right? So we believe that design thinking practitioners should be one part of the organization. Then we think that UX designers should be one part of the organization. Then we believe that design researchers should be one part of the organization. So we've created these specializations, which actually are very integrated. A UX researcher will be able to do UX, will be able to tell you what good UX should look like. Does the person use the tools? to give you your Figma screenshots or whatever is a separate story, right? Can that person be trained to do that? But what is the lens you're bringing into designing an artifact? Should a good designer, should be enabled enough in design school to come with this holistic skill set. How do I think about a problem? How do I process it? How do I strategically solve it? How then do I aesthetically solve it, right? So all these lenses should be able to come together to, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be a specialization in the, but all designers come with these skill sets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And increasingly the questions we need to ask is the question of relevance of some of these skills, right? What is poster making giving us? Of course, there are beautiful posters. We can definitely design much better posters than what a Canva or any of these things can do, because it's such a niche thing to be able to have an eye for a balance and typography and all of that. That's what we are taught, to make things beautiful, right? But is making things beautiful alone enough, or should designers also have the ability to say why a certain kind of poster will work in a certain context and why a certain kind of poster will not work in a certain context? Like, I've had design school students interning with me, where our first early conversations will always be about beautiful typography, beautiful layouting, font so small and so well thought out. So as a design faculty, when I see that, I will grade them for the beauty of typographical, the approach that they've taken. But in a environment that I'm working in, does anybody have the patience to look at typography, or do they want messages that are clear to read, concise to read, not just so much beauty, but also beauty and balance, right? So I think these interesting questions, we are at a very interesting time in design history also, where we need to ask these questions to ourselves as to what kind of a designer do I want to be. I've been asking this as well, because and I think this is a good time to come back to the accidental designer space that I like
Yeah.
to talk about, because I started my career as a communications professional, and I used communications as my way to create experience in the form of writing, in the form of some form of design as well, in terms of content and things like that. But from there, I moved to consulting and learning design. Where that is when I moved back into design, because I went back to, I generally trained to be a media and a communications person. Okay, so that was my early training, and then I went back and did design in design school, and it's from there that I became a design faculty. And then, so there's been an agility to basically what I've been doing is uh, gathering these different fruits with me as I go, and now I have a basket sort of thing. Okay, but there are, I've now reached a stage where I've essentially started to believe that design itself for me is just a lens. It is not the only superpower I come with. And design allows for you to make it a lens, because design is not a domain. Did you have a textbook in design school?
No, never. Like,
Right.
even we did not. I think I'm coming from a college where we did not even used to have exams. Like, right. So I mean, whatever we were doing was marked.
Exactly. Right. So that's
Which
that's
which
what
I which now I
yeah.
look back and I see that, oh, that was a great way of of teaching. Then that's where I've also realized that, okay, the way design is being taught is actually very different, and
Yeah.
whoever is trying to pick it up from a sort of a engineering textbook, I think
Yeah.
it's not gonna work.
Exactly. So we never had textbooks. We studied from different rooms of thought, right? Right from history to the current to the future to speculation to poetry. Everything made way into the design conversations that we were having when we were designing for a context. Why is that openness so important? It is because when you design for a context, you need to understand the historicity of the context. You need to understand the present of the context. You need to understand what the context would require in the future. So I think increasingly the conversations we should have around design and where it's going and what it needs to be doing is in this lens, right? How do we train designers to uh, think like historians, think like literature students, think like poets, think like artists, all of it together, right? And not just think like aesthetic fitments in an organization. Because the longer we do that, the longer we are going to not integrate into larger conversations where change can happen. for example, what you were saying, right? Social innovation. Social innovation is a space that is so important in a country like ours. And why aren't designers more sought after in spaces like that? Social impact spaces like NGOs and spaces like that, designers are used but to make posters. Or maybe, but what about strategy? What about systems, policy redesign, working with governments and
Yeah.
agencies to rethink the way people should be experiencing, say, roads, right? Design has a space in that, and these are not transportation designers I'm talking about, because that's a huge space
Yeah,
that's developing.
that's a highly skill level job
That-
as well. I think you need to
yeah,
know a lot of, it's a
exactly.
craft oriented job.
Exactly. But what about things like human centered design, including itself in the way people experience cities, or the way people experience parks, or the way why aren't designers being called into governmental organizations to enable better problem solving? And that conversation needs to happen deeper. And I feel, with the kind of experience I've had now for 2.5 years in doing organizational design, I believe very much more now that that's the route design should be taking. Having these, being a part of these tough conversations. But what does that entail? Okay, that also entails that you shed your shroud as a designer and as a creative person in the manner that I struggled with that quite a bit. Okay, you integrate yourself into the organization in a way which enables you to talk that language at some points. You struggle. I mean, I struggled some parts of it very much. I think I've gotten better at it now. But it's also about shedding that shroud and integrating in a manner which helps you understand what are you really solving for, so you're not going with a preconceived artifact mode thinking. You're going with more openness to receive what the context really is asking of you, and what does the context demand of you. And at that point, you might not need to be a designer at all. You might just need to pull out your design hat and actually solve for a HR problem.
Yeah.
So,
Apana,
so
I have one question, and I'm curious about that. Uh, so whatever we are talking about today, okay, we supposed to do a certain things about culture, accessibility,
yeah.
but this question is from the organization point of view, right? If I'm someone, I'm a 4-year-old fintech startup that's fast moving, right? So probably this subject is much more important to an organization that's maybe say 30 years old.
Exactly.
But we are actually not giving much care to that. We're not even talking about accessibility, or we are maybe not talking about culture. Like, I just want to focus on my profits. I just want to focus on how I can ship faster, right? What
Exactly.
are your thoughts in this ecosystem? And this, like, let me just tell you, like, that's also a mindset that we've built, because bunch of stuff is getting done by AI, right? How are we keeping this conversation relevant in such rooms?
So, I was having some conversations with people recently, and I'm so glad you brought this up. I was having a conversation with a couple of these startups around what is the role of culture in these spaces, okay? And what does it mean to design culture or organizational design? What does it look like, right? You're essentially putting your organization's uh, you're putting a foundation to your organization and how it will conduct itself in the process of making its profits, or in the process of moving in its economic path, right? It's essentially saying that the economic path and the philosophical, or the path that is the heart of the organization, which actually is they're not separate. We make sure that we go together, right? So when I was talking to some of the early startup stage organizations, the belief is that cultural work is work that needs to be done only when organization reaches a certain level of latency or maturity, right? It is not foundational, which is, I think, fairly wrong, because if you don't set your cultural course early on, then you're actually going to be firefighting at a point where everything caves down, and then you're trying to extract from the rubble and create foundations from that. Because already a lot, what happens when cultures collapse is, what you lose is trust. right? And not trust as a business alone, but also trust of your own people who are working in your organization as to what kind of space are they occupying and what is the kind of place they're working in. And you're losing trust in that space. So it is a relevant conversation on what should culture look like, and can design help build better cultural moorings in an organization. Because what design can do in this space, unlike what HR alone can do, I think, is bring creative ways in which culture can be understood. Okay, it can build ways in which you can integrate very many different forms of thought to understand how a new way of functioning can happen. Yeah, new frameworks can be thought of, new ways of behaving, conducting yourself behaviorally, right? Because in design, we are essentially, what are we tapping into? We are tapping into human behavior, right? And we actually are the experts on how human behavior can be understood, because every product we make is studying at depth what the human behavior of is going to enable the person to behave in a certain manner, right? So cultural conversations need to be had very early on in in the organization. It is the north star to which you move towards. It has to be that it can't be a single leader defining what it is. It has to be a collaborative process through which people think about what should happen. But I do think that organizations take time to prioritize these things, because, like you said, both these tracks, the speed at which you want to achieve business success, mapping that to how fast you want to achieve people's success, is always a contradiction. It is not that one is right and one is wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it is a contradiction. It is a very real pull, and it is something that people need to again reconcile as to what is priority, what will be phase one do, and those conversations need to begin to happen. And I think design has a large role to play in that space. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I actually have a follow-up question there, Aparna. I just want to emphasize it on this, because a big chunk of our listeners are actually working in such organizations, and people who are working in fast-moving spaces, and they might, I'll be honest, like they might even won't see relevance to what we are
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
What and again, just like how we are ROIing everything we are doing in an organization, what is the ROI of, say, bringing a certain culture, designing an organization in such a way, as a founder, as a senior operator, what do you think could be the ROI? And maybe it's not relevant in their first 3 to 5 years. Maybe it's relevant in their sixth year, right? At what point? So I have two questions. Like, at what point they should think about, hey, should we bring someone on the table who can help us, build our organization, better, and if I bring that person, how do I calculate the ROI?
I love this question. Okay, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit also. So, ROI is always calculated at a cost to, I mean, a numeric number, right? You want to have a kind of return to the business in terms of what is happening to business because I'm investing in stuff like this. Okay, now let's step a little aside, and there is something called as qualitative information, right? And many times we do surveys and people say that, oh, we are very happy, we're very engaged, blah blah blah, and we get a number and we are very happy to peg it at a number and close that conversation and say people are really happy here. Okay, but ground realities are very different. Maybe you have attrition, maybe you have people leaving, maybe you have unhappy people, you have health indexes that are falling. There could be multiple things, right? Imagine this in a space like a nursing institute, for example, where high pressure women are, what are the kind of people who occupy this kind of a workspace? It's mostly women. What kind of backgrounds they come from? What is the kind of work life balance they have? These are questions you can ask to even primary school teachers. Okay, what is the kind of work life balance these people have? So if every sector you question about where do they see their life currently and what are their aspirations, qualitative data tells you one thing: The minute you convert it into a digit number where you're making a scale based analysis, you're able to shrink that data and peg it at a point that is convenient again for you and me to accept as a reality of the organization. Okay, that's one piece. But the question I'm trying to ask is, when I believe at a personal level that culture or conversations around behavior and things like that are very, very important, is because what your organization essentially stands for culturally is how people behave in it. It's how people experience their everyday work. And it is what is going to set you apart as a great place. I don't want to say great place to work, but a place that people want to look back and come back to work at. Okay, and the quicker you invest in it, better. The quicker you start talking about it, better. I'm not saying invest in it as a get a team or whatever, but the quicker you start having those conscious conversations to say how do people want to be at, how do people need to be at work. And this is not just about work as a engagement space. It's also work as a place of how do I deliver quality work. What does quality work look like? That's also cultural, right? Culture is not only around people coming and having fun and having a great experience at work, which is sans any kind of skirmish, right? Culture is also about what is the quality of work I produce, what is my ownership at this workplace, what is expected of me, of how I behave with each other, what is the large scale system I want to create about how processes will flow, how will my person experience everything from the time they've joined to how they leave. How does that look like? What is that journey map of a person's growth going to look like? These are all cultural and very important questions for organizations to ask increasingly today, because the nature of work is changing so drastically. What people consider work is changing. What people want to consider work is changing. How the younger generation views work is changing, right? Gone are the days where you and when I was an intern, I can tell you what I did. I made tea for everybody every day for the first 1 month, okay? And I just sat around and listened to conversations, and I was happy doing that because I was at a film set and I was very happy doing that, yeah? But I learned from that conversation. But today's space of internships are very different. What young people want is hands-on work, and what they consider work and how much time they want to work is different. Lives of people have changed, commutes have changed. So there are so many factors that contribute to cultural work, right? And personas of working workforce personas have changed, and that's where design becomes a space through which you can understand your workforce very differently. And the same empathy question that we brought into, I think if any domain can do that and understand work from a way of what is aspirational, what is current, and what could be better or what it was, on map it, I think design is a domain which is able to do that leap. And that leap without saying that every box has to be ticked immediately, but rather to say, where are we now? Where could we potentially go? What are the interactions that should immediately happen? Where are the disconnects? I think design enables you to kind of frame this in a manner which is useful to your user. And that's where I think culture and cultural work, or work like organizational design or innovation, systemic, social innovation spaces are all very, very important spaces for design to get into at this point. Because social innovation is again the exact same thing. It's about how do I create social structures where people can have equitable access or have a problem solved, right, in a most efficient manner. And that's again a space where people should invest in to create change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a very fair answer, Aparna. So, just because of the of how we've been doing these conversations, and I'm just thinking about, like, you are a person who has been through different roles. You've been a part of different organizations. You've been a leader. Do you think this conversation is as a career, right? As things as we've talked about today, as a career can be relevant to people who who are maybe in the middle of their career, who are maybe like in their mid or the late 20s, and say, where is it coming from, like, right? And can we is it from a point of view as someone who's working around policy building, policy making, or you think, if I'm a product designer today, what is such curiosities where I'm leading to, work around in this sector. And let me also ask you, like, uh, who like, are these organizations who are paying for this? I think I am coming from a space who doesn't know anything about it. I'm someone who's in a bubble of living in a, in a startup ecosystem where I maybe stuff about this. I'm thinking maybe, once in a while, or somewhere I maybe saw a reel, or read a document. Uh, what are your thoughts around that? I mean, is it right? I'm just trying to find the relevance in our other jobs, or do you think it doesn't matter if it's not even relevant?
So, two parts to this question, okay? I've never believed that you take something, cut paste it, and put it into a frame and it will work in another frame. Yeah? A UX designer will have his or her own career journey in which you could expand your roles application based on where you are and where your organization is, to say where else can I add value in this organization beyond using UX as my tool, using industrial design as my tool. Where else does my skill set add value? Okay, that's a question. That's a very purpose driven question that I think all designers ask themselves at some point in their lives. We all get there. I've gotten there multiple times in my life. Okay. I was on a panel discussion at Shrishti about a week or two ago, and there were some three extremely seasoned designers from different parts. One was a comic artist, one was a space designer from different, and about 20-25 years of experience, each of them. And all the journeys that we were talking about, every one of our journeys were not linear. We all started with something like design, but then we moved and we traversed into different spaces, and we didn't get. But I also think in our times, there was nothing like UX becoming such a big pillar, you know. So it was very easy to
Yeah,
kind
it's actually very
kind
new for,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, if you see, it's like
yeah,
maybe 12 years, like 10 years old,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I remember I've studied industrial design, and when I was moving, when I passed, when I was, completed my college and started working, there's suddenly, there's bunch of, people are, doing UX design. There's suddenly a lot of supply. So I
Yeah.
think as a subject, it has, like, as a as a subject, maybe not from a app design, product design point of view, like a digital product design point of view. It has always been there, but maybe with different names and
Ye-
shape.
Yes. So I think this domainification of UX has also made a lot of young people believe that perhaps that is where design is positioned as a because industry dictates that, right? Like if there are, and a lot of our world has also become increasingly digital. So when the world becomes increasingly digital, then the role of designers are also constrained into those spaces, right? But the question that you asked around what does it mean, is there a kind of connection to people who are in UX or industrial design listening to this? Do they kind of uh, apply this, and is there application? uh, See, I believe, for me in my practice, I've identified three pillars that I can add value to. One is the idea of learning itself, because I see learning as a product that can have that can when I say product, I don't mean product in a form of buying, selling, but I mean as something that can has the potential to deliver a very good experience. Okay, and a good product that gives you a good experience. So I think learning should enable the learner to have that experience. I believe that I can reimagine and transform the way organizations think about how they want to engage with people and what are the kind of experiences they want to give people. These are areas that I have identified for myself where I think I add value, because I have certain core traits that I enjoy, which is I love being around people. I love conversations. I engage well with people, and I come with an ability to narrate stories. I have a ability to, and that is where I pull in from my communications background, right? So I'm able to draw these multiple lenses and create a sort of a personal interest journey that I want to create for my career. And I think increasingly people are asking these questions about what does a career mean, what does it mean in the changing world, and I think many young people who are listening to this, or what mid-career people who are listening to this, might be asking these questions on what does this career mean and where is it going to head. I think the challenge that we have as designers is to keep changing with these times and seeing where we can plug in some of these skills to create value. Today it's UX, but what are the skills and what are the capabilities that you're developing through UX, right? That is what you hold on to. It is not your UX making skill, because UX might become something completely different 3 years down the line if it is not already morphed, right? With AI coming in. But what skills and capabilities did working as a UX designer give you? It's that you hold on to and move to your next trajectory. So I think from this conversation that we've had, the only piece that I would like to highlight as a what could be replicated is how do you carry skills and not when I mean skills, I don't mean technical skills alone. I mean skills of who you've become as a person, the way you view the world, who have you become, what are carrying all of that into your next role, and how do you use that to build and scaffold yourself, right? And then
Yeah.
the lens is not a lens of, oh my god, I'm only limited to this domain. I mean, what else can I bring to this space? I think that's the negotiation that designers will be having in the future. I want to add a point, because I was watching, I saw this advertisement for a job by Anthropic in America for a role that they had, and they called it a people scientist. Okay, and it was such an interesting role. I looked at it and I'm like, wow, I mean, is this where so the role requirement is essentially qualitative design, understanding people, bringing people sensibilities, mapping data, listening, and informing human resources departments on what's really happening on the ground. So they've actually given qualitative. Look at what they've done in a country where we think that qualitative data is a lot of sham and emotion. Anthropic is a firm that has removed the human from the conversation, has put listening and human beings back, and said that that's a scientist's job, right? Look at the shift. So they do value human interaction. They do value what human beings bring to work, and they're willing to
Yeah.
give it a role like a people scientist. So there is roles.
Yeah.
What does a UX designer do? You understand people motivations. You understand how people behave in a certain context. You nudge them to behave in a certain way because you understand the way they think and behave, and that is a people role, right? You do
Yeah.
understand people
Yeah.
motivations very deeply, and that at the
Yeah.
core is what UX is. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if I answered your question, but I think I went about like that. But I
No,
think
but I absolutely loved it. I think it's, time and time, we when we think of or when we talk about replacing jobs totally with AI, the same time these top AI companies are, hiring for roles
exactly.
that people thought could be replaced by AI. Which
Yes.
is which also shows that some things are never gonna get irrelevant, which is amazing, and which is why we need to have a belief in systems thinking. Someone who believes in building organizations sustainably and with some intent, right? So that takes us at the end of the conversation, Aparna, right? So if I zoom out on today's conversation, everything we just talked about is just sort of having one idea wearing three outfits, right? It's design is not just the artifact, right? It's a whole system. The way we are thinking, it's a whole system. Whether it is we are talking about, if we are in a factory floor or a company culture, and even even in your own career, right?
Yeah.
So that I think what I've understood is that's kind of of the whole episode, right? So Aparna, before we end this conversation, I wanna ask you something, that if someone only remembers one thing we've talked about in today's conversation, what do you want it to be?
Yeah. Design beyond the artifact. That's really
Got
what
it.
I want. Yeah, for me, it is uh, don't limit the skill sets that design enables you with to creating a good artifact, because uh, design for that Venn diagram, because the artifact is only the aesthetic, right? Design for the idea of the need, the process, right? Design as the process is what you need to be looking at. And when you expand design from the artifact space into the process space, then the application of design as a domain, as a career, as a potential space for engagement just increases multifold. And yeah, and I think it gives you so many more entry points to do interesting work with communities, with people, with uh, product also, of course. But when you stop thinking about product as an aesthetic artifact and look at product as a process, there will be a product at the end of it, but the process becomes, like you said, systemic, holistic, long serving, well thought through, uh, ability to bring a product that can bring change in the long term. That's what you want design to do, enable to bring change in a form, right? So I think, yeah, design beyond the artifact is, I think, what I would like to leave this conversation with today. Yeah.
Awesome, Aparna. Great chat. Absolutely love the conversation today.
Deepak,
And yeah, thanks a lot for hopping on our podcast.
thank you so much, Deepak, and thanks for having me. It was lovely. I mean, yeah, enjoyed myself too. Have a good day.